Hello and welcome back to the Awakening Philosophy podcast. My name is Jed and we are reading the Phaedo, of course. We've been reading the Phaedo all this time. Now, we are at a turning point in the text. For those interested in drama or art, we're about 60%-ish through the text. And there's a sudden introduction or a sudden high point in the drama. And I point to that because often the golden ratio is used in organizing the proportions of a work. And here we have the introduction of the art of the logos. Socrates saying, by the way, you don't just trust the logos, you have to use the art of the logos. And he's been highlighting how important that is for us to do. And also setting the bar for him as a hero in the story. And not only a hero in the story, but in life. This is real. This is about our purpose as human beings. It's about our human species. It's about our human soul. It's about our spiritual and personal development. And we don't have a Socrates around. So how do we do it? How do we overcome our problems and reach our destiny? How do we purify and perfect so that when we reach Hades, we don't lie in the mud, outstretched in a barbarous bog, as this translator puts it. So that means that the arguments for the immortality of the soul and the nature of true philosophy, as well as what it isn't, that we've been learning, and we've been seeing a lot of what philosophy isn't in our everyday world, and maybe that's one of the reasons why we have problems in our world. We can't just believe these ourselves. Socrates is saying we have to use something called the art of the logos to relate to them, to recognize them, to understand them, to know them. Now, what is the art of the logos? That's the question. Is it understanding? Is it knowing? We don't know yet. But we have been developing a strategy for learning. We're going to look for key terms and we're going to look to structure them according to the dialectic so that maybe we'll gain an understanding of what the art of the logos. This is the thing. This is the holy grail we have to find in the rest of the text. And everything that we've been reading in the last couple of our read-alongs has been setting the stakes for the art of the logos. How important is it? It's the cause of villainy, but also it's the cause of the greatest defect on the soul. Hating the logos. And so Socrates has to not only become an advocate for the logos and slay the logos of Simmias and Cebes against the immortality of the soul, he has to leave behind something. Whatever is the opposite of being a bee and leaving a sting when they die. A bee stings you and then dies. And the sting remains even if the bee is dead. Socrates is doing the opposite of that. And we've been talking about how that might be a condition for being the greatest hero. So with all of that table set, let's jump into the text and see what happens next. Just like a bee, I do not want to leave behind a sting when I go. That's where we are. So, we have read this before, but let's go back to here. We must go on. First, if I do not appear to remember, remind me of what you said. For Simmias, on the one hand, as I believe, distrusts and fears. So this is his state of mind or character, that even the soul is more divine and beautiful than the body. Even though the soul is more divine and beautiful than the body, she may perish. This is Simmias. By being of such a nature as harmony. Right? Harmony is more beautiful and divine than a simple lyre body or a guitar body. But it's the first to go. when the strings go out of tune, and the decaying of the body of the guitar body itself takes longer. Whereas Seebees, let's go a different color, I think agrees with me in this, that on the one hand the soul is much more longer lasting than the body, but that this is altogether unknown whether or not the soul often really wears out many bodies. Let's make this green. And then upon leaving her last body at that time, self is destroyed. Last body. And this is her self-death. The total destruction of the soul. Since the body is always being destroyed, for its destruction does not ever end. I think he's talking about how we're constantly growing, our cells are dying and being replaced and so on. They knew that even back then. Is this the issues, or are there others, O Simius and Seebees, that we must necessarily investigate? Where you at and where you stuck? They both agreed that it was really these, says Phaedo, our narrator. Do you then not accept all our previous statements? Or some but not others? Phaedo says, some they said but not others. So they accept some of their previous statements but not others. What then about the logos in which we said learning is recollection? And if this logos has to be in this way, our soul must necessarily have previously existed elsewhere. So this is, if learning is recollection, necessarily existed somewhere before being imprisoned in the body. Keyword imprisoned. Let's make that purple. On the one hand, I was at that time wonderfully convinced by self. Maybe being convinced isn't good enough. And now again I stand by self as I would by no other logos. Simius says, and I certainly have to believe, self is in this way also. And I would be very surprised if I indeed ever believed about this in any other way. So that's interesting, because Seebees was the one who gave this dialectic first. He was able to outline the theory that learning is recollection, and when we looked at it ourselves, participating, walking the hero's path, engaged in the other side of the dialectic with the text, we recognized, there were 4 parts in his argument. Can we see how they fit with the 4 parts of the dialectic? And they did. It was really nicely done. But of course, when Simius said, I'm not quite following, he wasn't able to demonstrate it. He could define it, he couldn't demonstrate it. So as if we are developing an art, and if we're going to use the art of medicine, this is a technique that Socrates often uses. It's a more easy to see art, of course. It's pretty cut and dry. So and Socrates uses that as a metaphor to talk about art itself, the lesser to understand the higher. If there is an ideal art, let's use a pretty good art, medicine, to understand it. So if we do that, and recognize a doctor has to see what is the kind of problem a patient has, and then be able to demonstrate the art of medicine, relate his knowledge specifically to the patient in order to benefit them, we can say that's demonstration. A doctor has to be able to define it in his exams, but also demonstrate it with a patient. So Seebees was able to define really nicely the dialectic of learning as recollection, but he couldn't demonstrate it to Simius. Socrates jumped in and he took over and he was able to do it, and now we have in the text feedback as to whether or not it was successful. How successful was Socrates as heroically demonstrating what we might now call the art of the logos, relating it to the immortality of the soul and relating it to his particular patient. Simmias says, I certainly have to believe self is in this way also, and I'd be very surprised if I indeed ever believed about it in any other way. So, thumbs up. Socrates was successful in his ability to demonstrate the art of the logos. Now, of course, we have set a higher standard, not just define the doctrine of philosophy or define the art of the logos, not just demonstrate it, but can he divide it up into its pieces so that we can apply ourselves to those pieces to engage in a kind of problem solving so that we can bring it all together and gain understanding for ourselves. Can he pass on the art of the logos to leave behind something the opposite of a bee leaving behind his sting? Can he leave behind something great? So this is a high standard we're setting. But we're getting feedback that he did all right with the demonstration from Simmias here. Socrates, but you must necessarily change your opinion, O Theban guest, if you still maintain the belief that, on the one hand, harmony is a composite element, while you say the soul is a kind of harmony composed out of physical elements being in a state of tension. We hear that today, don't we? Our consciousness is, or our soul or consciousness is just a byproduct of our physical body. So when you die, there is nothing. Like the harmony in a guitar, it's a composite thing made up of parts. For certainly you will indeed not allow yourself to maintain that prior to a composite harmony existed, those elements existed even before that, out of which self must necessarily have been composed. Okay, that's kind of wordy. I think what he's saying is you must change your opinion about learning as recollection if you think the soul is like harmony. Because if we're saying that the soul has to exist before imprisoned in a body, if in order to learn through recollection, but you say the soul is a composite harmony, then it's going to have to exist before the parts of those elements that create the composite harmony. So you have to change your mind. You're at odds with yourself. Now, because that's worded in a strange way, we are going to read it in a different text, because we can. We are 92a. Let's jump into a different text. Okay, I've got to do this thing again. Alright. I, said Cebes, was wonderfully convinced by it at the time, and I still believe it more firmly than any other argument. Okay, similar but different. So we're in the lobe, which you can access for free on the Perseus website. And I too, said Simmias, feel just as he does, that I should be much surprised if I should ever think differently on the point. It would surprise him. Well, here's a surprise for you. Socrates says you must, my Theban friend, think differently if you persist in your opinion that a harmony is a compound and that the soul is a harmony made up of elements that are strung like harp strings in the body. For surely you will not accept your own statement that a composite harmony existed before those things from which it had been composed, will you? Right, so we got it. So our guess was good. Our hypothesis pans out here. Certainly not. Let's jump back into the Balboa. Do you realize then that this is what you are in fact saying when you state that the soul indeed exists even before she takes the form of the human body? Whereas at the same time, self is composed of the real beings that do not exist at all. Okay, the soul exists before she takes form in the human body, but at the same time, self is composed of the real beings that do not exist at all. Interesting. Which self is he referring to? The soul is composed of the real beings because our soul must have been united with the real beings for us to recall when we're in our body that do not exist at all. Let's keep reading. For harmony is certainly indeed not such as that to which you compare her, since the lyre and the strings and the sounds that are produced before must still remain unharmonized, whereas the harmony that is composed last of all is the first to be destroyed. In what way then will you accord this logos to that one? Okay, sounds like gobbledygook to me. I'm sure the parts fit, but let's read the other translation to see how it reads. Then do you see that this is just what you said when you assert that the soul exists before it enters into form and body of a man, and that it is composed of things that do not yet exist? If soul is a harmony, a byproduct of our physical parts, then how can it exist before our physical body? How can it be composed of things that do not yet exist? For harmony is not what your comparison assumes it to be. The lyre and the strings and the sounds. Oh, goodness. Okay, sometimes it's hard to get Perseus to work when I stream. And what I should do, if I was clever, you can click on the side here and get the whole text. So that would be the way to go from now on. So we're at 91, I think it was, 91A, 91B. Here we go. For harmony is not what your comparison assumes it to be. The lyre and the strings and the sounds come into being in a tuneless condition, and the harmony is the last of all to be composed. Makes sense? And the first to perish. Yep. Harmony comes last and the first to go. So how can you bring this theory into harmony with the other? With the theory of learning. Now, this might read a little bit more fluently, but from the Balboa, we have an extra puzzle that we might not see if we weren't also reading the Balboa. This is why Balboa is best. Notice. Self is composed of the real beings. That elevates it, doesn't it? In the previous translations, we've only got the idea, the particulars, the first level, level 1 reading, that the harmony is composed of parts. What's the word he used? Yep, doesn't really use a word. Composite, yeah. Yes, the soul is made up of elements that are strung like harp strings in the body. A composite harmony existing before those things that had to compose it. Now that makes sense with the argument. But so this expression here, let's read it. A composite harmony existed before those things from which it had to be composed. Now, the real Greek says, self is composed of the real beings that do not exist at all. Okay, see the difference? First of all, the word self, which itself has 3 levels of meaning. The particular, it. So here the soul. The honorific, the singular soul, the hyparxis of the soul of which there is just one. And of course, the ultimate, the one self, the thing that we're after the whole time. All of this is about the soul, the self, the one self. Know thyself is what we're after. The ultimate goal, our destiny. And of course, earlier, Socrates said, by the way, the people who just engage in contradicting logos, they don't know whether or not the argument that they're having should be they should even be talking about the thing. Actually, let's find it. Those who are unenlightened and have a contentious attitude, lover of quarreling and fighting, they engage in argument about anything and will in no way care whether or not the logos under discussion maintains any mindfulness. Now the word, phronesis and ousia. Ousia is being. That's the truth and knowledge we're after. That's the eye of the soul that can apprehend it. And we're learning more about how we apprehend it through that ousia cognitive function that we have, by being like it, by joining with it, by uniting with the pure. So we have something of the divine even in our body, in our soul. So that's ousia, and the other word is phronesis. That's the virtue for which we trade in the other virtues. So how will we know whether or not the logos under discussion maintains any mindfulness, any phronesis and ousia? Maybe it's just gossip, especially those who spend their time, what do they do? Contradicting the logos. These are the people who spend their time just contradicting the logos. So what can we use to measure? Well, if we have a phronesis and ousia, we have a feeling. So that could be like an intuitive metric, whether or not this is a good logos to discuss, or if it's something negative. But here, excuse me, I'm tired today. self is composed of real beings. Self is another metric. Is the logos something of the self? So while our state of being, phronesis and ousia, and that's a single word. Actually, let's get the pronunciation, because that's a kick-ass word. The word is proteusin. There's our phron from phronesis. Fronteusin. Phronesis and ousia. Okay, so your state of mind of proteusin, or if, of course, we talk about the ladder of the logos having two rungs, state of mind and understanding, philosophy having noesis and dianoia. So our state of mind, fronteusin, phronesis and ousia, or is it about the self? The understing wrong. Can you understand that the logos is necessarily about the self? It's because our goal is to know thyself. That's what we're doing. That's why we're here. Now, of course we can see, well, that's interesting, because all of the objects of focus that take us from loving learning to loving wisdom, from philomathesis to philosophia, a philosopher, they all have the word self in them. You start by learning about tree frogs or jelly beans or whatever you're interested in, geometry, but then if you keep up with it and you seek it with excellence, you'll realize, oh, hang on a second, there are certain principles, preconditions, or causes that must necessarily exist for this realm of study that I'm learning about. For excellence, I have to know those too. Now you're in the realm of philosophy, because those things that are necessary for this physical condition of tree frogs or jelly beans, prior for its physical existence, we give it the word metaphysics, which is a fancy word that means before physics. But here we say in philosophy, we say it's the realm of being. And it's the knowable thing, because it has the nature of ousia. Its nature isn't time and space like the physical world, its nature is ousia. And that's also the eye of the soul that we attempt to awaken in our learning. So one of the qualities of the things in being that take us to a philosopher from a philomathesis, from a lover of learning, they all have the word self in them. Self-beauty, self-justice, equality itself or self-equality, self-likeness, self-unlikeness. These are all the principles the existing beings, like the principles of same and different, self-same, self-different, have to exist before you have them as an adjective. A same tree frog, or a same species of tree frog, or a different tree frog. Same and different had to exist. Also beauty. Beauty itself had to exist before it was an adjective. So principles and nouns and things like that all have the word self. So if you want to know if the logos is worth being discussed, the others who aren't philosophers, lovers of the body, who are interested in fame and riches, and are lovers of contention and contradict the logos, they won't know what to talk about. They'll go any way the wind blows. They'll especially whatever the many are saying. In the Republic, Socrates has a metaphor. Imagine the city with all of its people as a giant beast, a monster, and people who can tame the beast or manipulate the beast. That's what we think is wisdom. That's what we think wisdom is. So if you can manipulate popular opinion for fame or for riches or something like that, then we call you, oh, that's what you must be wise. Get voted in or whatever. So, of course, that doesn't matter what the many think. Truth is truth. We want truth of reality. We want knowledge. We want phronesis. We want to learn what we can learn to enhance our state of mind and understanding in this life and in the next. Doesn't matter if the beast is yelling ignorance. That's why a lot of the people who claim to be philosophers or are just grifters or con artists, they become, there's an expression that we use nowadays, audience locked. Especially a lot of the right wingers, they realize that the people who they're getting their money and fame from are really racist. And they don't want to be racist themselves, but they know if they don't, they're going to lose their audience. The beast wants something, and they've got to appease the beast. So that's a kind of thing that happens. Becoming audience locked to the ignorance of the masses. The right-wing masses often. Prejudices, inside cave good, that kind of thing. Prejudices and ignorances to do with in-group. Now, we have a different kind of thing. Self. So we can say, is the Logos going to lead us to self? Is it about self? And here we have the word self. So this is why the Balboa text is so important. It's not just the particulars saying that so in the previous translation that we've had to work with, a composite harmony existed before those things from which it had to be composed. Self is composed of the real beings that do not exist at all. Very different. Okay, first of all, the word self, and we talked about the significance of that word. Secondly, the real beings. The previous translations took out the very thing Socrates has been saying a philosopher seeks. His whole doctrine is about reaching the real beings. Talking about it in many different ways. Giving us the material so we can do dialectics on it, so we can ourselves experience it. Talking about it having a hypoxis. Talking about self-ousia. Talking about being truth and knowledge and so on. So, self is composed of the real beings. Is that interesting? The self that we want to seek through knowing themselves is composed of the real beings? It's kind of in alignment with what he said about the soul having a hypoxis, just like the real beings. So the soul that has a hypoxis in the real beings, or in the single soul, the self soul. Socrates said that previously when he said, by the way, there's a hypoxis of all the beings, and he gave a list. Beauty, justice, goodness itself, all selves, but also lesser, greater, equal, that's another category. But also same and different, that category too. So there's three basic categories he's pointing to of self terms. All of them have the same hypoxis. We could call them self-ousia. And then he goes, apply that argument to the soul. That's all he said. He didn't do it for us. He just said for us to do it. And we did. Oh, that must mean there must be a hypoxis of the soul. There's your soul and my soul and Socrates' soul. But Socrates is even saying, hey, don't care about what Socrates says. Just focus on the truth. And he says, by the way, if the soul is destroyed upon death, I wouldn't be sad because that means I've destroyed my ignorance. He said, literally, he said, I wouldn't lament. Where is that? We should have highlighted this. Maybe we haven't got to there yet. Have we read it already? Yeah, right here. Yeah, after he says, I want to, if it's true, it will persuade on its own. I'm not here with the goal to persuade, unlike those who are lovers of contention. Even less. But if nothing exists after death, well then, indeed for this time even less, self would be inclined to distress. So there's still a self. I'm just curious. those present with lamentations before death, since neither will my ignorance neither will my ignorance continue to exist along with self. It will come to an end a little later. This is interesting. There's a mythology about Hercules going into a section of Hades where people are like, there are ghost-like versions of people playing out and then dissipating. This seems to be what Socrates is talking about. Well, if my soul dies upon death, that means my ignorance won't continue to exist along with self. So he's making a clear distinction between soul and self. There can't not be self if all is self. Now, there may or may not be souls, and maybe this is part of it, going from souls to the self, because he's saying, hey, our reincarnations are based on how we nurture our souls, but we want to escape the cycles of reincarnations, meaning escape the cycles of nurturing our soul to be what? With the divine, and maybe even beyond that with self. So if our soul dies, it's kind of a good, because if your soul dies, then whatever ignorance that came along with self will shortly dissipate or come to an end a little after. So it's not the bad thing you think it is. And this happens sometimes in philosophical midwifery and dream analysis. People who recognize, they engage in dream analysis because they recognize they have a problem and they want to overcome it. But one of the things that they discover is, well, if our problems are based on a false idea of myself, by dropping these false ideas of myself, will I lose my personality? Equally so on the other side, not just removing the shadow, removing our problems, removing our fate, but reaching destiny. Some people claim, well, if there's enlightenment, if there's just one soul, or if it's all just one being, or if it's all just one self, layers, different levels of enlightenment. Or about my personality. When someone becomes enlightened, will I lose my personality? Will I no longer be Socrates? So this is the kind of fear that I think he's pointing to here. You know, I would worry even less if our soul ended with self upon our physical death, because that means the end of my ignorance. Curious way of thinking, right? If all is one self and our goal is to know the self. Now, I've had this explained in a certain way. When you were little, you had certain false beliefs about yourself and whatever. But then as you learn more about yourself, as you grow just by being a human being, would you say you've lost your personality, or your personality is being purified? You're not any less of yourself than when you were little and ignorant. The more you learn, the more you are becoming yourself. So it's not that you're losing your personality. You're clearing away what isn't you, which is what everybody does as they grow. So interesting thing here. But he's not making that claim that our soul dies. He's becoming an advocate for the logos. Now, if there is a soul, hyparxis of soul, that knows the hyparxis of being, then if we say that the real beings, plural, compose the single being, self-usia, and if that argument can be applied to the soul, then we could also say the soul is composed of all of the real beings. The hyparxis of the soul unites with the hyparxis of beings. That's how come we can know the things that we are remembering in learning. So, different layer to the reading because we have the Balboa translation and we can see the word self and real beings under here in the Greek. But, as we talked about last time, there is a way of reading it with 3 levels. Bring up the thing. Here. The word self is tied with the self triad or the excellence triad. Self logos, self being, oneself. So the word altos can apply to all of them. The particulars, the particular argument, the soul we're talking about here is made up of composite elements. That's usually the only reading we've ever gotten up until the recent translation from the Balboa, which is why we're ready to awaken philosophy in our society and in ourselves. There is the next level of reading that we just did. The honorific self, the self-soul, is actually composed of the real beings. Interesting. That brings together our arguments of the hyparxis of beings, beauty, justice, goodness, equal, greater, and lesser, same, different, likeness. These 3 categories of self are terms. They all have a hyparxis in self-ousia. That must have been known by us. Therefore, if this is a oneness, then how do we know it? Our souls must also have that triangle. Socrates says apply that same argument to souls. So while you have us have 2 triangles here. These are the many souls. These are the many beings. But they share a hyparxis. That's the implication of what he gave us to figure out for ourselves before. So, he said self is made up of the many real beings. That makes sense of what was said previously. So it gives us a thumbs up. You're on the right track. And it's nice. It feels nice to see, it's all connected in this really cool way. This first thing that Socrates said, apply the hyparxis of beings to the hyparxis of souls. That was a puzzle, but that comes together with this puzzle that we could only get with this reading. So that's cool. So we're playing a good game here. Now, of course, the self-triad has the ultimate. So we have a triad for that, don't we? Yes. The particular, soul, the honorific, the hyparxis of soul, which is made up of the real beings, and the ultimate. So, can we apply the ultimate, the one self to this, the destiny, know thyself? That self. The dimension above the dimension of metaphysics. In the same way we say in the particular world, we have tree frogs that are like and unlike other species of tree frogs. Therefore, there must be a metaphysical realm where the idea of like and unlike must exist. Same thing with beautiful things. There must be a beauty itself. That's the metaphysical world. That's the object of knowledge. But equally so, if there are many beings or many principles like and unlike, we can ask a similar question, taking us to this higher dimension, the one self. And of course, we don't just understand it, we want to get there. And of course, our understanding of that can help us make sense of different spiritual traditions. The Taoists talk about an experience of oneness. Could that be here? Some types of Buddhism talk about an emptiness or a nirvana state. Could that be there? What's the significance of having them with the logos? These are applying it to the art. Why? We talked about the art of the doctor, being able to recognize where someone is at and where they're stuck. So equally so, if we are gaining understanding of the dimensions of reality, which have an understanding and an experience, a state of being, then we want to be able to recognize where we're at. Oh, you're here? You've just done Buddhism and you've reached nirvana? I see where you're at. But also I see what I'm therefore going to use the art of the logos to introduce what's needed. Maybe the logos is important for somebody who's reached this without it. Maybe there's a significance of having the logos here. Equally so, somebody here might want to ask some questions about there. So these are the implications that would follow with our hypothesis of what this art of the logos is, which is a curious thing to imagine being able to do. So we want to know what's the one self reading of what we're reading. The one self is composed of the real beings. And in this argument, they do not exist at all. So the implications of Simmius's argument that if the soul is like a harmony composed out of physical elements, then it can't exist prior to those physical elements. Also, that means that if the soul learns through remembering, it can't be composed of those real beings, because it's composed of the body. So we can't have the hypoxis of soul composed of the real beings, because they do not exist at all in his argument. Whatever gives rise to the soul doesn't exist. It's physical. Existence means physical. And if that hypoxis of soul is the same as the hypoxis of real beings, that means that the real beings don't exist at all. Interesting implication of his argument. That one's a little bit tenuous, but... So we want to know, what is the one self? Is the one self composed of the real beings that do not exist at all? Oh, that's a puzzle. If the one self is beyond the real beings, are they beyond existence? Do not exist at all. So if we add the idea of oneself to this argument, we've given ourselves a little koan, a little puzzle. In the same way that this argument is saying, look, the soul is not composed of the human body. The self-soul is composed of the real beings, but not the human body. Can we amplify that? Can we use it anagogically? In the same way we say the soul is not composed of the human body, can we say the self is not composed of the real beings? In other words, the one self that we want to know through know thyself isn't a composite or a byproduct of the metaphysical dimension, in the same way the soul isn't a byproduct of the physical dimension. So this argument here, we can apply it to our particular friend, Simmius. But Socrates just said, hey, look, the reason why I'm doing these arguments is not to persuade other people. It's to persuade myself. I'm only eager that myself thoroughly believes that anything has to be. So behold what a greedy way I use the logos. I'm going to cross out selfish because I think that's a very problematic word. Greedy. Look how greedy I am for the logos. So in a similar way, we can say, hang on a second, for us, Simmius might not be at the level of real beings yet. But if this argument is an argument with an art, then maybe it's a kind of a principle that we can apply for ourselves. So when because our question is not only how do we get to the realm of real being, but what do we do when we're there? Remember the yoga, the separating from the soul? It's not just how to get out of the soul. Let's go all the way back to it. All the way back to the doctrine. So this is it's like one paragraph that outlines the whole thing within the doctrine, page 17, 67c. This purification is what we mentioned in the logo some time ago, to separate the soul from the body as far as possible. Okay, that's step one. And to be accustomed to gather herself together from all quarters. Number 2. And to collect self by self out of the body. So there's something we're doing when we're out of the body. We're to collect ourselves together. And to dwell alone self by self. As far as you're able, there's more stuff we're doing out of the body. We're collecting and we're dwelling alone. And we're doing this by self thing, whatever that may be, hint, hint. Both now and in the future. Hey, there is more to do. There's an activity there. That's called death, and that's practicing philosophy in the right way, of course. That's all the way at the beginning. And now, so if we were reading that and developing questions, maybe we had the question, what is it when we reach real being, what do we do? Of course, he also mentioned the virtues. We don't just want truth and knowledge, we want phronesis, which is tied to the virtues. So there's something more we have to do. So maybe we can apply this argument that the soul isn't from the human body. We can apply it to, the self isn't composed of the real beings. Maybe. If that's curious, let's take it with us. Okay. Let's keep reading the Loeb translation, because this is a bit of a complicated read. Then do you see that this is the way in which this is what you say when you assert the soul existed before it enters into the form and body of a man, that is composed of things that do not yet exist. If you're saying the soul is composite of the body, but it existed before the body, then how can it be composed of things that don't exist yet? But harmony is not what your comparison assumes it to be. The lyre and the strings and the sounds come into being in a tuneless condition, and harmony is the last of all to be composed and the first to perish. So how can you bring this theory into harmony with the other? It's an interesting play on words here. How can you harmonize this idea of harmony with you believing learning is recollection? I cannot, says Simmias. No joke. And yet, says Socrates, there ought to be a harmony between it and the theory about harmony above all others. Yes, there ought. Well, there is no harmony between the two theories. Now, he's really playing on this thumbs up, this play on words, isn't he? Now, which do you prefer, that knowledge is a recollection or the soul is harmony? Which are you going to pick? Because they don't fit together. The former, decidedly, Socrates. For this other came to me without demonstration. It merely seemed probable and attractive. Right, haven't we been talking about this? The appeal to the contradictions, the appeal to the grifters, to the appeal to the people who are not philosophers but claim to be, but are actually lovers of debate and arguing. What's their whole thing? What's the whole grift? What's the whole conservative or right-wing grift? What feels true, seems probable, is attractive, appealing. Oh, really? I get to be better than these people if I'm racist? Yeah, that's attractive. So he's talking about what was the convincing element of this theory of harmony of the soul. Our soul as harmony. It seemed probable and attractive, which is the reason why many men hold that, yeah, that's what we've been seeing, right? Good for us. That's why 40% of people vote for Trump. It feels right. It feels attractive, his racism and his nonsense. Maybe I won't mention Trump, because that guy, he's a bit of a jerk. But as a principle, he's just a caricature of that principle. All racists and fascists try and appeal to people through what seems probable. It does seem probable that these immigrants that I don't like for some reason might be the cause of all of our problems. And it is attractive if I think that we're the superior race or we're chosen by God. So yeah, let's do a genocide against the others. This is the reason why many men hold it. I am conscious that those arguments which base their demonstrations on mere probability are deceptive. Okay, now we've got another level of not just prejudices and the appealing of the fascists and the grifters, but even scientific theory is based on probability, isn't it? So there's the other element, which is of course better than prejudice, but it's still probability. That's science. Base their demonstration on mere probability, they are deceptive, and if we are not on our guard against them, they deceive us greatly in geometry and in all other things. So yeah, so he's adding science. All right, it can be appealing to science because it is a more rational approach to the physical than prejudices, which is literally against evidence. So it's evidence-based, but it's probability. It's even in geometry and those other things we mentioned. But the theory of recollection and knowledge has been established by a sound source of argument. So there's something we're doing that's greater than prejudice or feelings or, what's familiar to us from our upbringing. But it's also greater than science. And of course, when we realize that lovers of learning have to become lovers of philosophy, and philosophy is particularly about being, and that's not a part of science, then we can understand why this is the case. But we can add probability is deceptive. Yeah. There are lots of probability arguments that have been wrong and deceptive. Think about science from 50 years ago, how much crazy nonsense was involved in that, and how theories might come in and out of fashion. But the theory of recollection and knowledge has been established by a sound source of argument. For we agreed that our soul, before it entered into the body, existed just as the very essence, which is called absolute, exists. Okay, so now we can see where our translator is at and where he's stuck. Because his limited language, not having the Greek terms, falls down here, doesn't it? We agreed our soul, before it entered the body, existed just as the very essence, which is called the absolute, exists. What the heck is the very essence? Don't know. Doesn't have the Greek. What is the absolute? What exists? Absolute being? Absolute beings? Absolute ousia? Absolute soul? What's he talking about? What absolute? What does he mean by exist? So let's quickly jump over before we're going to keep reading this, but we're going to jump over quickly to just make a comparison to see the significance of the art of the logos and having the right terms. So 42D. Surely the logos about harmony should conspicuously possess concord, if indeed any other does. Okay, so he's going for concord over harmony. It must in a conspicuous way. So then, your logos is not concordant. So that's the harmony, not harmonious, concordant. Look then, which one of the logos do you prefer? That learning is recollection, or that the soul is harmony? I prefer the former, O Socrates. Here we are. The latter one came to me without demonstration, but with a certain probability and attractiveness. So there's our science and our prejudice, or our pathologos. Which is why most humans believe it. Right, most humans do. Remember, Socrates is an exception. Earlier in the text, he said, how many people can know the real beings and give an account of them. Actually, let's go back to it. It's a cool section. Give a logos. Okay, so here we are, bottom of 32, 76b. Socrates is talking with Simmias about the logos of learning as recalling, which is kind of what we're talking about now. He says, which do you think, Simmias? We're born with knowledge, or that we recollect knowledge later on in our life that we had previously remembered before we were born? Simmias said, I can't make a choice. Socrates asks him a question, artfully. How about in the following way? Can you make a choice and say in what way it appears to you is the case of self? Would a person that has knowledge be able to give the logos of that which they know? So knowledge isn't just experiencing it. If you really know it, you should be able to give a logos of it. And this is the significance of what we were just talking about with using the art of the logos to relate to Buddhists and Taoists. Can they give a logos of it if their tradition didn't get there through logos? Certainly they must necessarily be able to do so, O Socrates. Socrates continues, and does it appear to you that everyone can give a logos of those selves? What selves are we talking about? The equal, the lesser, and the greater? It's a class, and those beings. Beauty self, good self, justice itself, holiness itself, and those beings. He didn't mention the third class, by the way. Same and different. Did he? Left it out. Okay, there is another class. But by the way, all of those beings we've been talking about, beauty itself, justice itself, equal, greater, lesser, anything which we stamp the seal, that which absolutely is, and we talk about when we ask questions and answer them, there we go, is our argument, is our dialectic about self, is it worth having, or are we just lovers of fighting, gossipers, or non-philosophers? All of those things. Can anyone give a logos of them? He says, I wish they could, but I fear tomorrow at this time that no longer even one man will be left who is capable of doing so in a worthy way. And Socrates doesn't push back on that. So someone who knows these beings and can give a logos of them, real knowledge, is exceptional, is rare. And he talked about, hey, using the art of the logos is to recognize that that the extremes are rare. Socrates, happy to move into the next life, trusting, not just with trusting, but with nous and logos for trusting, not just with logos, but the art of the logos to trust, would follow if he says it's not good to just trust without the art of the logos. And by the way, the reason why I can be of good faith is because I've said you have to go into Hades initiated. Initiated means having the knowledge. But also for an Asis, which means not just the knowledge, but the understanding, because that's what the virtues start with. So understanding, so trust, understanding, knowledge, and the art of the logos. And therefore, he's completed his work here. But that's rare. The majority are between the extremes. That's what the use of art helps us to see. Now, the reason why we're talking about that is, here we are, a few pages later. Um, da, 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 da. Right. Learning is recollection, or that soul is harmony. Which do you can't have both. I much rather prefer the former. The latter one came to me without demonstration. So interesting. We said for Socrates to be a hero, he has to be able to not only define the doctrine, but demonstrate it. So his own argument, his prejudice came without demonstration, but with a certain probability and attractiveness, science or prejudice or pathologos. Which is why most humans believe it, right? Most humans believe it. Now we're seeing the reason why we went back. Most humans believe it because those whose arguments are not based on prejudice, the pathologos, what feels right because of your family, your culture, and of course we talked about the evolutionary origins for everything inside our cave is good, outside cave bad, scary. And that's why grifters and con artists and fascists prey on that very feeling always. That's how they grift the people to act against their own interests and vote for fascists, vote for the super rich, and so on. The Republican Party calling themselves the working class party, that kind of nonsense. They prey on that. But those who think better than prejudice and what's familiar think rationally, and well, what we call rationally is science, which is based on probability. We don't know, and so if you go to a scientist, we don't know what happens when we die. You might get more fundamentalist ones says, you can't know. Although that wouldn't be science. They can't say that you can't know. All they can say is, I don't think you could, it's probable that you can't know. Because very few people have come back from the dead to tell us what happens. Well, here's one. Probably, but again, that's the extreme. There are very few Socrates out there. Most people think either based on what's popular in science and what's attractive. Not with demonstration, which is part of the dialectic, definition and demonstration. So most humans do believe it because those who think with the other way of thinking, the logos, are rare. Now, maybe not forever. Maybe if we this channel gets popular and we all do well, and not because we're convincing others, but as a byproduct of us convincing ourselves, because we are greedy for logos. We're greedy for logos. As a byproduct, it will be a convincing and beautiful way of reasoning that maybe humanity can awaken philosophy. Maybe that's worth doing. But on the other hand, I am aware the logos upon which the proof is based on probability are merely false pretensions. Interesting, he has an awareness of this. And if one does not guard against those cells, lowercase s, they will most certainly thoroughly deceive one. Even in geometry, even in science, right? And of course, this idea that the soul is like harmony, and once the body is gone, like it's a byproduct, that's very common among those who are interested in science, geometry, based on probability. It's a reductionism, they call it. We're all just reducing the soul to chemicals. We're just chemicals, and dopamine and endorphins and neurons firing and that kind of thing. That's what we are. That's all we are. And when we die, we're worm food. So that's what is being recognized here. Whereas the logos of recollection and learning is developed by a hypothesis worthy of acceptance. Interesting. So these are the hypotheses that we've been developing. Hypothesis. For in this way, our soul was also said to exist somewhere before she came into the body, just as, here we go, this is what we were looking for. This is going to be different than what we just read. Let's really quickly recap the previous translation. This is why we can awaken Socrates' heroic message today, because we have this translation. Let's look at the previous one. But the theory of recollection and knowledge has been established by a sound course of argument. That was different, isn't it? Sound course of argument. Pretty different from the logos of recollection and learning is developed by a hypothesis worthy of acceptance. And not that different, but still different. Here we go. This is what we're comparing it to. For we agreed that our soul before it entered into a body existed just as the very essence which is called absolute exists. Now I am persuaded that I have accepted this essence on sufficient and right grounds, and I cannot therefore accept from myself or anyone else that the statement that the soul is harmony. So for we agreed that our soul existed before it entered into a body, existed just as the very essence which is called the absolute existed. Compare that to, for in this way our soul was also said to exist somewhere before she came into the body, just as the self-ousia is of the kind that we qualify by the name of that which is. Thus I persuade myself. As I persuade myself, I accept this logos in a sufficient and correct way. Necessarily then, by these reasons, it is proper, neither that I accept the theory from myself, nor anyone else, that the soul is harmony. What's he talking about? Self-ousia. That we qualify by the name that which absolutely is, that which is. So there's our stamp, that to which we stamp the seal, that which absolutely is. He's pointing back to that argument. We missed that. The reason why I believe logos recollection is the thing where we say that which we stamp the seal, that which absolutely is, exists by a certain hyparxis of the real beings we're calling self-ousia. And that's the way our soul must have existed before she came into the body. So there's our hyparxis of soul. We miss all that. We miss the word ousia, we miss the word self, we miss applying self to ousia. So whatever ousia we have within our individual souls and bodies that allow us to do this, to return home, to take the spiritual journey, that's the same ousia. It's the self ousia at the hyparxis point. Let's go back to it. The equal, greater, and lesser, all the beings, good self, just self, holy self, beauty self, that which we stamp the seal, that which absolutely is, in asking questions and answering questions. We must have acquired knowledge of all of them before we were born. Learning is the recovery of this innate knowledge. And he goes on to say, by the way, even the poets are not murmuring, repeating that we are deceived from our perceptions. Even songs talk about how our eyes deceive us and so on. She looked beautiful, but then when I dated her, yada yada. So here we go. No, so that's what we talked about before. The poets mentioned that there's a different kind of, the word here is murmuring, but it's repeating. Take notice, Simmias, must the following be the case? That which we are always repeating to each other, that the beautiful, the good, and every ousia such as this, which we refer all things, from which our perceptions arrive, we perceive adjectives, beautiful things, good things, and so on. We refer all of those to that same ousia by discovering they exist according to hyparxis, the top of the pyramid, fullest flowering. Hyparxis prior to ourselves. And so we must necessarily compare those two selves, and just as if they do exist in this way, and it must also be in this way for our soul. This idea. So the first thing we read before was beauty, self, goodness, self, and equal, and greater and lesser. All of those which we stamp the seal absolutely is. All those things exist by a hyparxis, the same ousia, self-ousia. Apply that to the soul. Otherwise, how could we even have this conversation? It has to be in this way. There is a necessity for them to exist. How can we talk about all these things? Because we've never seen them. Even logos is a kind of, in our language, as a kind of principles that we can recognize and we can relate to and understand from different people. That has to exist somewhere. You've never seen a logos or heard a logos. You recognize it in your seeing and hearing. So this was the argument that Simmias is pointing to that was more convincing than probability or familiarity. Simmias concludes, the same necessarily has to be so absolutely, Socrates. The logos indeed takes refuge in beauty. There's a beauty, and remember we just read Socrates saying, oh, if it's true, it will have a natural beauty and persuasiveness. So Simmias picks up on that, adding another argument to this theory. How could he recognize the beauty in an argument he's never heard before? He must have known it and must be recalling it for it to be familiar or recognizable to him. In the same way, our soul and the ousia of which you speak both exist before we're born, in the same way. There is nothing so clear than this, that all natures such as these most especially do exist, like the beautiful and the good and all those we spoke of just now. Thus it has been sufficiently demonstrated. So here is the word demonstrated. So we're like many pages back, but here, demonstrated, number 1. Sufficiently demonstrated, number 2. Beautifully demonstrated, number 3. Necessarily, 4. So these are 4 key terms that we're using to answer or hypothesize an answer to our question, what should change our mind? It's not familiarity or what sounds right or what feels right. It's not even probability or geometry or science. What should change our mind then? We've got a list we're developing for that question. Sufficiently, demonstrated, necessarily, and beautifully so. Something in this argument. So, a hyparxis. Big word. The logos has been delivered in a hypothesis worthy of acceptance. Let's make that blue. In this way, our soul was also said to exist. In that same way. Hyparxis. If we all have some familiarity or recognition of beauty and justice, every human being with language, with logos, with mind, then it's not like some of us recognize beauty but not equality. It's all of them. So whatever our soul was experiencing that allows for us to learn by recollection must have been all of them together, therefore hyparxis. And if it's everything all at once, and all souls knew it, then all souls must have been experiencing it, therefore a hyparxis of all souls. We're all one soul, just as all beings are one being. Isn't that curious? Is that argument sufficient for you? Is it more convincing than what you're told, that we're all different? What feels right? We're all individual people different from each other. And there's no learning, it's absolute, it's all opinions, and that's why we should invade other countries who have different opinions, or fight other religions who have different opinions, or sign up to different debate bro channels so they can debate their opinions, or go to study philosophy at certain places that they teach you Hegel's opinions and Kant's opinions. Is it interesting? Is it sufficiently and beautifully and necessarily demonstrated that we are all the same soul in our hyparxis? Just as the beings are all the same hyparxis called self-ousia? I don't know. Is it? In the same way our soul existed before she came, in the same way, in this way, before she came into the body. Just as the self-ousia, there's our self-ousia, which is what? The hyparxis of the beings, is of a kind that we qualify by the name that which is. So he's really taken this on board. So he's gone from beauty and justice and equality, all those things that we stamp the seal that which is, to say, hey, what is self-ousia? What gives the name? So if somebody asks you, by the way, what do you think really exists? This table that I can knock? Or is that kind of is that a transitory existence? A reflection like in a mirror? If by existence absolutely and eternally, what is that which is? Oh, Smith is saying, oh, that we call that self-ousia.
Wow.
Thus, as I persuade myself, I accept this logos in a sufficient and correct way. He's judging for himself. That's pretty good. Thumbs up. Necessarily then, by these reasons as it is proper, neither can I accept the theory from myself or anyone else that the soul is harmony. So, if Socrates needs to leave behind some sort of art of the logos so that we're not convinced against the logos and therefore get betrayed and end up being convinced that there is no logos, there is no reality, and we are poor judges. Is it working? And Socrates is Simmias learning the art because he's saying, I will never, from myself or anyone else, accept otherwise, that the soul is harmony, that thing that we're taught, even today. Is he better off having had this dialogue with Socrates here? Let's keep going and find out. Socrates says, what then about the following one, O Simmias? Does it seem proper to you that harmony or any other composite should somehow be maintained in a different way than those elements should be maintained out of which she is composed? Okay, let's jump back into the other text because the English is a bit easier to read in the other one. Actually, I am going to take a quick 10-minute break. I have a toothache. So actually, no. Let's keep reading. And I'll save the break for after. Let's power on. Let's keep going. Okay, and now I have a jumper on. I have accepted this essence. Okay, so now that we know he's talking about self-ousia, he's referring to the argument about the hyparxis of the being, self-ousia, and that argument we apply to the soul, necessary for learning to be recollection. And we remember the catchphrase, that which we stamp the seal, that which absolutely is. This is what he's referring to here. So let's read it in this translation and keep going. The theory of recollection and knowledge has been established by a sound course of argument. No logos in there, by the way. Big deal. Big deal that we can awaken philosophy now that we have the logos. The art of the logos. What if there's no logos in the translation? Actually, let's find, just for fun, this whole text hangs around, this big turning point, about 60% through, hangs on the art of the logos. Now, one of the reasons why it's time to awaken philosophy in our world, and it's possible to, is because we have this translation which has the word the logos in it, meaning we can solve the puzzles that need to be solved for us to ourselves develop the art of the logos. So we're not left with a bee sting, but the best thing. Kind of sounds nice. Socrates left us with the best thing, not a bee sting. So let's find lack of art, rules of art. Where does he say actually define art as art of logos? Can you see it? Advocate for the logos. Use the logos. Of course, all of these adjectives and ideas can be put into your own dialectic of the logos. Reviling the logos. Rules of art. No soundness to the logos. Lovers of contention contradict the logos. Use of art. Okay, let's type in art of the... Now, my search function is not picking up multiple words for some reason. Maybe if I put... Why can't I search for multiple words? Okay, let's just type in art and see what we get. Oh, it's not even... Okay, art space. There's no art in spacebar? What is going on with this search function? It's giving me parts of words. Parts with art in it. Okay, I just want... Let's type in logos, see what we get. Okay, we're struggling here. Because for some reason the search function is not as good as I would like it to be. Art in one word. Why will it not give me one word? Here we go. The sick condition happens whenever anyone puts their trust in some logos as being true without the use of the art of the logos.
Come on, man.
Let's try that again. Without the art of the logos. Whoops. Okay. All right. I had some problems with my sound drop thing. Without thee, art of the logos. Okay, so that's 90b. So let's find that in our other text. When a man without proper knowledge concerning arguments has confidence in the truth of an argument and afterwards thinks that it is false, whether or not it is so, and this happens again and again. Okay, this seems a bit early. Maybe I got the wrong 90b. Wow, it is this right one. Okay, let's keep going. This happens again and again. Then you know those men especially who whether or not it is so, this happens again and again. Those men who have spent their time in disputation come to believe they are wisest men, and they alone have discovered there is nothing sound or sure in anything, whether argument or anything else, but all things go up and down like the tides of Euripus, and nothing is stable for any length of time. I think this is the wrong section. No, it's the right section. It finishes with the tides of Euripus. That is so different. Okay, let's look at the Balboa translation and see why it's so significant. Hey, welcome to the chat. Yeah, good question. What is the whole of seeing, feeling, and hearing? That's a good question. I've been using that, and they walked by myself in more than 10 plus years. Good question. So this is the turning point of the text here. Let's read it as it is and compare it to what we used to have. The sick condition happens when anyone puts their trust in some logos. Now, keyword logos. Logos is a key defining word for philosophy. So, logos is keyword. Shortly after believes self to be false by being so at times and other times not being so. Okay? The word being, key. And so on with another case. And even more so, you know, with those who spend their time contradicting the logos. Again, the word logos. They believe they are most wise, and they alone have thoroughly understood that there is no soundness or stability among the realities. Okay, keyword logos. Keyword, key phrase, the whole turning point of the whole text. Art of the logos. Logos is key, being is key. So it's not just true or false, it's to do with being. Those people who spend their time contradicting the logos think that they're so clever and wise because only they have thoroughly understood that there is no reality, there is no logos, there is no rules of art. It's all just opinions, or you can't know reality and that sort of thing. That's what makes them so wise. Okay, so keywords. Logos, key phrase, art of logos, keyword being, realities, that's key for us. and rules of art, and we can see the Greek techne. So if there are not just logos, in other words, and the next line he clarifies it, logos is true and firm and capable of being understood. So that's why logos is key. We live in an understandable realm, and that understanding is true and firm. It doesn't change. It's not based on opinions. It's not philodoxy. So those are the key words we're looking for. We're looking for logos, being, realities, rules of art or techne, and the art of logos. Let's see if all of those key points, all of which we need, let's see if they are in the text that we used to have before this translation. When a man without proper knowledge concerning arguments, now, knowledge concerning arguments, is that the same as art of logos? Okay, so art of the logos is not there anymore. Instead of art, we have knowledge. No. This is key, right? Because knowledge has a very specific meaning. That's part of our questions that are given to us in the text that we are here to solve. What is knowledge? Because philosophers seek phronesis and knowledge. It's not art. Maybe knowledge is part of art. Maybe. So this taints the main question, and it also taints the idea of art, which is kind of a different kind of main question too. All right, and it's not art, it's knowledge, and it's not logos, it's arguments. Is logos an argument? Or is it different? Because logos is that which is true and firm, understandable, directs us to being, follows the dialectic structure, has an existence as the highest aspect in being. That's very different than an argument. So let's keep reading. So if they, without proper knowledge concerning arguments instead of art of the logos, has confidence in the truth of the argument, again, no logos, and afterwards thinks it's false, whether it really is or is not, so no being in there, we've lost being. And this happens again and again. You know, those men who, especially who spent their time in disputation, come to believe they are the wisest of men, and they alone have discovered there is nothing sound or sure in anything, whether argument, not logos, or anything else. Where's reality? The people who contradict the logos think they're clever because not only are they claiming you can't understand things and therefore just vote for leaders, just have religious beliefs because it's not understandable, right? Wrong. But they say that no, there's not even a realm of reality. There isn't a being itself or beauty itself or justice itself. This is what they say. It serves them. It's good news for their bad habits in that means they don't have to spend the time coming to know the realities and coming to understand them with the logos. They can just, there isn't one. This is very attractive to certain people about anything. They want to be experts, and they say, well, how much have you studied in this field? Oh, no, it's not knowable. Therefore, I don't have to do any work. Everyone wants to cosplay as the guru. It's very interesting, a human condition, in that we all seek wisdom. We all seek the art of the logos. We all seek phronesis and truth. But human problems come is when we do it without the logos. So we just pretend. I'm so wise because I'm shouting over you. I'm so wise because I'm contradicting the logos. I am smarter than you about religion because I'm saying there is no realm of being. There is no divine. Well, have you learnt it? Have you studied this? Have you mastered the art of the logos? What was it like when you encountered reality? Did you collect yourself outside of your body? Have you remained there for a long period of time? Have you applied it to the virtues? Have you done any of this work? Or are you just dismissing everything so you can pretend? And is that the nature of people who are often in authority? So no realities in the text we used to have. Which is important because that distinguishes what they say, right? We have to not only learn what philosophy is, we want to learn what philosophy isn't. What are the counterattacks? Specifically, the reality that we find ourselves in as human beings is not understandable. That's the big one. There's no logos. No mention of logos here. They talked about arguments, different. And what's the other big one? There's no being. There's no realm of reality. There's just the physical world, and then we'd worm food after. Simius's argument, we're worm food. Because the soul is a byproduct of the physical. It's like a harmony of a guitar. All things are up and down like the tide of Euripus. And nothing is stable. Right? Very convenient for people who just want to stay with their opinions. So this is the significance of being able to awaken the logos now, and the art of the logos, and awaken philosophy now. We have a text which translates the word logos and not argument. The reality is the big thing that's denied and not anything else. The art of the logos, not knowledge concerning arguments, very different. Okay? So we're in a very privileged position to be able to dialogue with Socrates, engage in a dialectic with Socrates, pick up what he left us, the best thing, not a bee sting, the best thing, the art of the logos. We can pick it up and we can develop it. We can improve on what made Socrates a hero. Thankfully, because we have the Balboa translation. And we're learning what it means to be a philosopher. Look for key terms. Look for puzzles, that sort of thing. It's not here. It ain't been here since. It ain't been here and since, like, before the Balboa translation. So, and by the way, logos directed towards being, that's a kind of way of defining philosophy itself. If you're removing reality or being, and you're removing logos, you've removed the two pillars of philosophy. We keep saying we say over and over again how it's the two pillars. The ladder has two rails. It has states of mind and it has understanding. That's the logos. That's philosophy. Another way of and so if you remove understanding that is true and firm and universal, that's the logos, and you remove being, which is the highest state of mind, then what are you left with? Not philosophy. In fact, philosophy is kind of defined by logos directed towards being. In fact, that logos directed towards being, or dianoia, which is the understanding, makes the virtues. Socrates brought in the vices. If you have the vices, let's say temperance or sound-mindedness, mastering some desires to be mastered by others, that's vice. Mastering your desires so that you follow the logos directed towards being, that's the virtue. Courage, holding on to what logos says about being. Wisdom, using the logos of being as your paradigm. So we haven't had philosophy until now, until the Balboa. we've had the opposite. We've had lovers of contention, which in my experience, most philosophers I've ever met have just been lovers of contention. They like to debate. They kind of get off on it. They kind of feel superior, which has always puzzled me. And they get mad when they hear things that they're not used to hearing and they can't develop an argument. That's always been a puzzle I've had. Doesn't feel like philosophy to me. But the lovers of contention. So we've missed understanding. Well, that's what we're left with. And of course, lovers of the body. Unless we have the word logos and we have the word being. That's what makes it all up. That's the ladder. And of course, that gives us what we need to understand the shadow of the ladder, our problem. You could say the same hierarchical structure of the logos that we call dialectic, but without the logos directed towards being, or not without, not absence, the image. In chat, we're talking about right now the Philosophical Midwifery book. The image of being is one of the highest states of being, or the causes of our problem. Just like true being is the cause of the logos. And it's the pathologos. The distortion or the distorted reflection of the logos. It's a shadow. An image is a shadow of the real thing. The pathologos is a shadow, distorted image of the logos. So this is the cause of our problems. This is how our problem functions, just like this is the cause of reality, and this is how it functions and how we should function to return to being. But then you could even say there might be a level beyond being, which is curious. So if you take being, you've taken away the cause, you've taken away our ability to solve our problems and our ability to reach knowing and art and truth. If you take away logos, you've taken away our way of reaching being truth. And you've taken away what we need to understand how our problems function. So this is the function, this is the cause. You've taken away the essence of reaching destiny and escaping fate, evolving and solving problems. And we were just reading bring it up. Actually, the text that we were reading in the Balboa has those two words, has being. Let's read it again. The sick condition, pathologos, talked about having an understanding of the sick condition and its cause, the image of being, the reflection of being. When people put trust in some logos as being true, there has to be some image of truth to the person who passes on our false belief, without the art of the logos. Which means if we learn the art of the logos, we can apply it to the cause of our sick condition, our pathologos, to free ourselves from our problems. Okay, so the art of the logos, as sometimes being but not being so. People spend their time contradicting the logos, think they're so wise and they're the ones who've got it thoroughly understood, because there's no soundness or stability in being, the realities, and logos and rules of the art. So here we have the goal or the cause, beings or the reality, the functioning or method, the logos, and all together applied in a skillful way, techne, rules of the art. So the rules would be the structure or paradigm that you can follow to use it artfully. So those are the three necessary elements: being, logos, and dialectic or its use, skillful use. And applied to the art of medicine, there has to be an ideal healthy body. There has to be an understanding of how everything fits together to reach the healthy body. And there has to be a structure to that so that it can be applied within the skill of medicine. All right? Now let's jump into the text that we used to have, that people used to learn philosophy from. And maybe if we don't have those three big elements, maybe we can understand why philosophy is the most misunderstood thing, even though it's the most important thing. Why people who claim to be philosophers or teach philosophy at university are not doing it. Maybe we can understand why. Whoops. Same passage. Let's look at it. This is what they were learning Socrates from, learning philosophy from. A man without proper knowledge concerning arguments has confidence in the truth of an argument and then thinks it false. It happens again and again, and especially those men who spend their time in disputation come to believe they are the wisest of men and that they alone have discovered there is nothing sound or sure in anything, whether argument or anything else. But all things go up and down like the tides of Euripus, and nothing is stable for any length of time. Have we seen the word logos? No, not there. Have we seen the word reality and being? No, not there. Have we seen the idea of art of logos? Nope. Knowledge concerning arguments. Hey, you can be one of those people, academic philosophers, who have knowledge concerning arguments. Not knowledge in the high sense, because being's not there. Knowledge in terms of, I know how to contradict you. I know all of the arguments you young students will make, and I'm so smart because I know how to contradict you. I can dispute you. Yeah, that's pretty much what it is. Think about all of the philosophy lecturers and professors who hear the same arguments over and over. They're not curious. They're not, I'm not interested in what this first year has to say, because I know all the arguments. This paragraph talking about the corruption of philosophy highlights the cause of the current corruption of philosophy, because instead of art of logos, we have knowledge concerning arguments. Instead of logos, it's arguments. What do people who do disputation do? They have arguments. That's not the logos. In fact, this previous translation puts together the two opposites. What are the opposites? Arguing and disputation, and the logos, the art and skill of the logos. But here it's mashed together. People learning what philosophy is and isn't won't get it unless they read the Balboa, necessarily, and we're seeing for ourselves why. So of course philosophy has been buried for so long. Of course it's the most misunderstood. And we're seeing why. And we're doing what we need to purify ourselves from those problems ourselves, whether or not others come along for the ride. Okay, so no art of the logos. No logos instead of arguments. Spend their time in disputation, think they're wisest, and they alone have discovered that there is. So this is a bit different. They alone have understanding because. So the understanding is taken out. Here it's people who are engaged in disputation think they alone have discovered that there is nothing sound or sure in anything, arguments or anything else. See, that's not true. People who love contention and contradiction don't think that they are the only ones who have discovered that there's no truth in reality or reason. It's a very common opinion. What the text actually says is they think that they have thoroughly understood because they've come to that conclusion, not that they are the only ones. Very different. So not only are we misunderstanding what philosophy is, we're misunderstanding what the opposite or the shadow or the distortion or the vice version of philosophy is. Or we're not being able to understand it because of the text that we were using. This is the importance of having the Greek and having the Balboa translation. And so what were the things that that the non-philosophers claimed to make them wise and actually thoroughly understood things? There's no soundness or stability. Sound or sure? Yeah, that kind of works. In what? The logos? Not there. Argument. In reality? Not there. And in also there's no rules of the art. So again, there's no art, but there's no rules of the art. It's not even mentioned. Techne. Rules, paradigm, and skillful use. Dialectic. The rules of the logos to reach reality. Dialectic. The skillful use. The demonstration of the dialectic. The paradigm. Logos, dialectic, and reality all gone. The things that make philosophy philosophy. There's a lot of missing pieces from the chat. Yeah. Interesting, right? But for us, thankfully we have this. And we see there is a logos that is firm and true and capable of being understood. There is an art of the logos. In fact, that's the whole section. The qualifications for what would make Socrates the greatest hero is, as we've established in the previous couple of episodes, the art of the logos. Can he define the art of the logos? Can he demonstrate the art of the logos? But can he pass it on? He says, I don't want to pass on something like a bee sting. I don't want to leave behind it like a bee. I don't want to be a bee and leave behind a sting where I go. In fact, we have the standard. He has to leave behind the art of the logos. And also, in a way that we can improve the ability, improve the quirk ourselves, pass on the quirk so that it can be improved and we can benefit from it. So if that is what would make him a hero, and that's what he is establishing for himself, define, demonstrate, provide the conditions for division and analysis. So not only myself understand it and do it, but be in a kind of dialogue with you, the reader, so that you can pick it up. You do the division and the analysis stage. So it's a dialectic within the dialectic. So I want to pass it on. Socrates is saying, this is the standard for excellence. This is the standard for my swan song. To do the art of the logos, to define the art of the logos, and to pass it on. If I'm not going to be able to do that, then I've failed. This isn't the archetype or the ideal hero in the ideal story. And until we have had this text, it literally could not have been done. Socrates has been destined to fated to failure. Because those things have been removed from the text. This is the importance of reading. So all of this faith and belief stuff is going to fall down because you need to be able to read it for yourself. You can't trust someone else because they can get it wrong. Like we've just seen, everyone has been getting Socrates wrong. Not only that, you have to learn how to read specifically for yourself because even the past translators have been wrong. That's why we have the Greek. That's why we're learning to look up the Greek, reading it for ourselves. So, Socrates has failed as a great hero. He's not a hero. He has left behind a sting, especially if we're mixing in what isn't philosophy with what is philosophy. Knowledge of arguments, that's exactly the opposite. Art of the logos, that's what it is. If we don't have the expression art of the logos, then he can't be it. He can't succeed in his quest. in the conditions for what makes it a great hero. If the ways of getting there, the logos dialectic and being are out as well, then literally there is not what is needed for us to understand what Socrates is saying, understand philosophy, continue the tradition, thumbs up, level up the tradition, and for Socrates to be a hero. So only now is the time where we can say Socrates can be a hero or not. And we've just seen in that one passage why that's the case. Why now is the time that Socrates can really reach his fullest flowering as a hero for us, and we can rediscover and reawaken philosophy for ourselves. And we are going to now see how well he succeeds in passing on this art of the logos to Simius and Cebes, but especially to us. On that cliffhanger and on that bombshell, I hope to see you next time. Thank you for joining me. Feel free to join us on Twitch chat, live time, live recording. Follow us on YouTube. Join the Discord if you like, and support on Patreon if the Patreon is up. If you think this is something good and worth sharing and continuing and maintaining, nurturing, passing on the art of the logos in this sort of a way, and you're able to support the channel, feel free to do so on Patreon. Thank you so much, and I hope to see you next time.